Hello, Lake County, Florida, and welcome to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber and Supply. I'm your host, Tom Magruder, and you're listening to my 790 AM WLBE in beautiful Leesburg, Florida. I'd also like to welcome our viewers today who are watching on Lake Sumter Television, that's LSTV, and Red Apples Media on Bright House 199, Comcast 13, and Florida 4. We're glad you could join us today. Romac Lumber is the leading provider of building materials in Central Florida, and since 1945, local residents have trusted the Romac name for all of their construction needs. With locations in Leesburg, Mount Dora, the Villages, and Ocala, Romac Lumber has the area covered. Well, spring is here, and for many people it's time to buy or sell a home. Today we're going to discuss two big parts of selling a home, the home inspection and the survey. And I have two great guests who are experts in the field. My first guest today is Gus Czaplak of TLC Home Inspections in the Villages, and TLC has a reputation of being honest, fair home inspectors who get the job done promptly and correctly. There are many issues with home inspections from both the home buyer and home seller's perspective, so understanding the process is very important. With that, I'd like to introduce Gus Czaplak from TLC Home Inspections. Gus, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Don.
Gus, we're so glad to have you here, and we've got a lot to discuss, so we're going to dive right into it. Gus, take a few moments to tell our listeners and viewers about TLC Home Inspections, such as where you're located and how you can be reached, because I'm sure after this program there are going to be many people who will have questions and they'll want to know how to contact you.
All right. First off, let me thank you for having me as one of your guests today. TLC Home Inspections is located at 3400 Southern Trace in the Villages, right near 466. We can be reached via phone at 352-435-5190 or via email at tlcinc@gmail.com.
And Gus, how long has TLC Inspections been at the Villages?
We have been in the Villages for 5 years now. That's how long we've been in Florida.
Okay, so you've been out in the Villages, and I take it you've inspected a lot of homes.
Yes.
Now, I understand you have a pretty extensive background in construction, and there's some inspectors that have never had any background in construction, and that's a big deal because they don't know what they're looking at. And just being short, talk a minute about your background in construction and what you've done and what you do in construction.
Okay, I grew up in construction. My father was a contractor in Western New York. I learned the majority of my skills working with him. We did the whole package when it came to building and remodeling, from concrete to framing. We did the roofing, electrical, plumbing, the windows, doors, drywall. Every facet of construction we did in-house. We didn't really use much for subcontractors, so I was very aware of everything going into the home. And from there I went on to work as a superintendent for a large commercial developer. We built tilt-up concrete buildings before starting my own building and remodeling business. Once I got here to Florida, I received and currently still maintain my state certification as a residential contractor.
Well, one thing about that gives you an advantage because you've actually put hammer to nail, and you've built things. You understand how it's put together. When you look at, and I know you don't want to say anything about other inspectors, but from a home inspection process, how important is your background to doing a good job?
Well, I think it's extremely important. I can't necessarily see being able to just come maybe from a desk job and try to learn all the ins and outs of trying to inspect a home without a solid construction background. I think it's extremely important to have that as a base, but yet at the same time, not every contractor or construction worker will make a great inspector.
Absolutely. Not until here recently, in the last few years, the state of Florida did not require much in as far as licensing and accreditation of home inspectors, but that's changed. Talk a minute about the licenses and accreditation you hold at TLC Home Inspections, and also why that's so important, because a lot of people will look when they buy a house, and let's put it in these terms. It costs several $100 to have a house inspected. And they say, well, Uncle Joe was a plumber, or Uncle Joe was a carpenter. I don't need to get a home inspector. I can have Uncle Joe do it for free. First, address what your accreditations and license are and what they mean, and then why you will do a better job than Uncle Joe.
Okay. Well, first off, I was licensed in the state of New York prior to moving here to Florida, before they required it in Florida. We had to take a 140-hour home inspector course, as well as perform proctored inspections with our class and our instructor. A lot of the stuff here it's basically, if you wanted to get a license currently in Florida, you'd have to go through about the same thing. Probably a good percentage of the inspectors here currently were able to get grandfathered into being an inspector. So I can't necessarily vouch for exactly what they have there.
So you're saying a lot of them didn't have to go through the program.
Originally, all they had to do basically was send in, I think it was 120 inspections to the state for review. And basically they would be granted their stuff. And then also, it's just like any other trade. Licensure is extremely, extremely important. I'm a big advocate of it, where everyone can be kind of held to the same standard. And we're, just like anything else, you want to make sure everybody is licensed and insured and not doing something that they're not supposed to be doing out there.
And your accreditations are through who?
There was a turnkey home inspection school. It was David Clark was my instructor. He was very influential in writing the New York State home inspector licensure law. And
let's talk a little bit about the type of home inspections. And like I said earlier, first, a home inspection was a few $100. In general, for like a 2,000 square foot home, what type of price are you looking for a home inspection?
For that size home, most of the homes in the area, obviously it goes by square footage, but your average home is usually right around $280. That's my price range. You should usually, expect to pay right around $300 or so. And for me personally, that gets you up to 2,400 square feet, and then on and up from there. So
if you're looking at a prospective home buyer and you found what you think the house of your dream, tell them why that $240 is a great investment.
Well, there's many. For most people, it's the largest investment that they'll ever make in their life. It'd be kind of, buying a home without having it inspected, I think, would be kind of like buying a car and never even looking under the hood to see if it had an engine.
And that's a big deal. You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber. Our special guest in the first segment is Gus Czaplak. He is the owner of TLC Home Inspections in the Villages. And Gus, let's talk about some of the inspections that you guys offered at TLC Home Inspection, and sort of explain, give us a better explanation. When you do a home inspection, what do you review? What should people expect from a home inspection?
Well, during an inspection, all the visually accessible areas of the home are covered. It's a non-intrusive inspection, and the home needs to remain in the same condition it was when we started. All items are operated using normal operating procedures, whether it be thermostat or switches.
Well, and let's make one point, because a lot of people may not understand non-intrusive. You're not going to drill in concrete. You're not going to go cutting into walls. Everything has to be visually seen from the attic, outside or inside, correct?
Correct, yes. We cannot deface any of the property.
Yep, okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, all the major components of the home, me personally, when I do them, I always start on the exterior of the home, covering all the foundation areas, siding or stucco or whatever we may have, soffits and fascias, all the windows and their screens, any of the doors, and then we come inside. Usually right after the outside, after I get hop down off the roof, we come inside. Usually most of the mechanicals are in the garage, so we go through the electrical panel and the HVAC system, the water heater, and then into the house where we do the appliances and windows and doors, electrical fixtures, plumbing, and smoke alarms. And if the home is equipped with an irrigation system, I usually finish off with that.
Okay, so you go through the whole house and you check all these things, and it could be 50 to 100 or several hundred items you review. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've never counted them. I have heard somewhere that it's in the thousands.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it just depends on the home, but basically anything in the home that you could think of is, if it's attached to the home, it's inspected.
Okay. Now you list that you also do a WDO and termite inspection. Tell me what that is.
Well, a WDO is considered termite or powder post beetle or old house borer, and also wood decaying fungi. It's any kind of insect or fungi that will damage wood and do structural damage to a home.
So you'll look for that too?
Yes.
Now, does that take the place of a termite inspection from a pest control company, or is that something that homeowners still will have to do?
All WDO inspections are provided by licensed pest control operators.
Okay. All right. The 4-point inspection, what is that?
Generally, a 4-point inspection is required on a home that's over 30 years old, and that's for the insurance companies to kind of gauge if the home has been updated, and it includes the roof, the HVAC system, the plumbing, and the HVAC system, excuse me. And they basically just want to see that the stuff's been updated, what the material types are, and if it's the roof, they want to know roughly the remaining life expectancy of that.
And then you'll test for mold and water testing?
Yes, I'm also indoor air quality certified for mold to do air sampling inside. And basically what that is, it's taking a sample of all the mold spores in the home and the spores that occur naturally outside. We send them into the lab. They analyze the types and amounts of spores in there and determine whether or not you have an elevated level in your home.
And one thing I notice you do is a roof inspection, and that's starting to become more prevalent because insurance companies are requiring that roofs be inspected before they issue insurance. Talk a minute about a roof inspection.
Well, we do the roof certifications, and most of the time that's for any roof that's over 15 years old, or if the age of the roof cannot be determined. Most of the time, the insurance company doesn't really want to insure the home if it's not going to have 5 to 6 years of remaining life expectancy on the roof there. They plan to keep you as a long-term client and want to make sure that they're protected in that way.
Okay. And you also say you do an allergen test. Explain what that does.
Allergen testing is relatively new, and basically that tests for the 4 major types of allergens in the home. The most common one is pet dander, and people might not know if they're allergic to that or not, but if there's elevated amounts of it in the home. But that's a pretty simple test. It's basically a canister that I hook up to a shop vac, and it takes several samples throughout the home, and once we collect the samples inside of there, we send it off to the lab for analysis, and they let us know what we have in there.
Let's take a moment to go through the actual process. If someone wanted to call TLC to complete a home inspection, say today, they would first call what number?
First, I would call area code 352-435-5190.
Then what happens from there?
Well, from there, that's my direct number. I do all the scheduling for TLC as well as the inspections. So basically, we find out most of the time it's under a time constraint, and depending on how their contract was written, they'll have anywhere from 5 to 15 days or so to get it done. So I work with the customer to see what day soonest works best for all parties involved, and we figure it out that way.
So you'll do the home inspection within 5-10 days, and then you have to do a report. How soon will the homeowner get a report?
Generally, that report is usually issued within a few hours of the inspection.
Okay.
That same day. I always, and I'll know depending on what my schedule is that day when the report will come out, but I usually try to under promise and over deliver, so the client will know when the report's coming. So, but usually within a few hours after the inspection.
So if someone needed a quick home inspection, say they had a cash deal that came up all of a sudden, and they called you and said, "Hey Gus, can you do a home inspection for me in 2 or 3 days and have me report back in 2 days?" You probably could get it done?
Yeah, most of the time that is the case. And a lot of it depends just on schedule and volume of inspections that week.
Let's talk a little bit about the report they're going to get. Describe what's going to be in the report and how you do your recommendations.
Well, the report will come emailed unless otherwise specified by the buyer. Email is the best way to do it, and it'll come as a PDF file that they can open up and view or print, whatever they prefer. And they're usually anywhere from 20 to 30 pages now, and probably around 50 photos is about average to one of them. A lot of the things, the very first part of it will be the report summary, so if there was any kind of repairs to be made to the home that they were buying, that would be all listed there. And then there could just be some other simple recommendations in there that might not be part of that, maybe like cleaning the gutters or installing gutters or something like that, just to help with the home maintenance or maybe further issues along the line.
You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber. Today we're talking about buying and selling a home, going through a home inspection, and then later about the survey. And we have right now Gus Czaplak with TLC Home Inspectors. And Gus has one of these odd spelling names. Spell your last name. It's pronounced Czaplak, but you spell it how, Gus?
It's spelled Czaplak.
That's an odd spelling name. Anyway, we were talking about the home inspections, and let's talk about some of the limitations on the home inspections and what a home inspection will not do. And also, a home inspection really can't predict the future durability of a good can it?
No, it can't. I mean, a lot of people always want to say, well, how much longer do we have on the hot water heater? It's just like anything else. We can't predict the future, what's going to happen. All I can do at the time of the inspection is just let you know the current condition of it. There's no way to know for sure how long it'll keep functioning, or it's going to fail or start to leak in 3 or 4 months or something like that.
So to be honest, you go out to a house tomorrow, you home inspect it, you see no visible signs of water. You're going to take a picture probably of it. You can test it, but it could be eating out from the inside out because there's no way for you to know that.
Correct. If there's nothing visible, you wouldn't be able to pick it up with a moisture meter, or if we saw something visible, obviously we'd put a meter on it. But yeah, there's no predictor, and unfortunately, we are slightly limited to what we can test and how we can test it and what we can do.
So, for example, the hot water heater went out 5 days later after someone bought the house. It's really nothing you could have done. You're just giving your best evaluation.
Yes, as long as it was properly inspected, and that's one of the reasons for all the photos in the report, to show the actual condition of the item at the time of the inspection.
I want to talk about some particular problems we're having in houses around Lake and Sumter County, and just sort of get your take on it. One of the biggest problems in older homes around the area is copper pipe deteriorating. I know you can't look inside the wall, but what do you do to sort of mitigate or try to catch a copper pipes going through a deterioration process?
Well, a lot of, like I said, usually on a home, very, very, very little of it is actually visible. What we can do, or try to do, is just try to pay extra special attention to the back sides of any of the plumbing walls, or the areas above the ceiling if the plumbing happened to be run up in the attic. To be able to inspect anything that we can do and see. But usually we can only see a couple feet of it right around the hot water heater, and other than that, there's not really a whole lot we can do with it.
Another big issue these days, because insurance companies won't cover, is a couple of defective electrical panels that can catch fire and aluminum wire. And talk a minute about those issues with aluminum wire and electrical panels that you have to identify.
Right. A lot of the two panels that are the biggest issues are the Federal Pacific electric panel and also the Zinsco electric panel. And basically, the issue with those is a lot of the breakers didn't operate. So if they came across a condition where the breaker should trip, it wouldn't trip, and then the wire would get hot and melt and possibly have a fire hazard. The aluminum wiring, the issue with that is it becomes brittle and soft at the connecting areas, and can come disconnected, and also it's a safety issue, can also cause fires that way. So
you're listening Around the House. Our guest is Gus Czaplak. He is the owner of TLC Home Inspections. And let's talk a moment about roofs. Replacing a roof costs a lot of money, and for a new homeowner that could be a big deal. How do you evaluate a roof in a home inspection, Gus?
The roof, unless it's too steep or inaccessible, I personally always mount the roof and inspect it from all accessible areas there. And what we're looking for is the condition of how much granule loss there's been, to condition all the flashings, the valleys, a lot of the what would be problem areas with the roofs. A lot of the models of the homes here, they seem to leak in the same spots.
Yeah.
So that's once you find out what all those spots are, it makes your life a little bit easier. But look for any dips in the in the roof sheeting, and see if we're getting any kind of water in there, and just make sure everything's looking like it's supposed to.
The HVA system, are better known to a lot of people, heating and air. That's a big deal in a lot of houses. And what do you guys do to inspect the heating and air systems?
Well, make sure first of all with the unit inside, we make sure there's not a lot of excessive corrosion going on the evaporator coil. Check out the filters, the airflow, make sure everything's working that way. And really the biggest tool I have for that is my thermometer to take air temperature differentials of what the air is going into the unit and then coming out of the unit. And we like to see anywhere from 15 to 20 degrees of temperature change with it, and that's a good indication of how the system's operating, make sure it's working efficiently.
And I understand a lot of insurance companies on older homes are requiring wind mitigation inspections. Is that something you can do? And if you do those type of inspections, what are you essentially looking for?
Yes, we do. We do a ton of wind mitigation inspections. The basic gist of that, what we get in this area is how the roof assembly is attached down to the exterior walls, what the roof sheeting is nailed to the trusses with, how often it's nailed, and whether we have tie-down straps or clips or maybe just toenails. Not too many people get extra discounts in the area with hurricane shutters. If you're a little closer to the coast and a little higher wind zone, then we see that a little bit more often.
Let me ask something. In a typical real estate sale, when you have a home buyer and home seller, who typically pays for the inspection?
I have had the buyer pays for the inspection. I can say that one time somehow they got it negotiated into the contract that the seller actually paid for the inspection, but other than that one time, that's out of all the inspections I've done.
And is the buyer, when he gets that inspection, under any obligation to share with the seller the inspection?
It depends on the situation. If it got to some areas of if they were trying to use that to cancel their contract, a lot of it is dependent on how the contract and stuff's written. I usually defer that to the buyer themselves and the realtor. But if there's any repairs to be made, they might want to share some of that stuff with the seller so they can get that done.
And your report's going to detail out problems with the home and your recommendations, isn't it?
Yes. Yep.
And it's pretty well a checklist. Now, the buyer doesn't have to do all this, or the seller doesn't have to do this, but that's a negotiating point, isn't it?
Yeah, like I said, all that and all the repair stuff, I do my best to put the stuff in the right area on the report where it goes, stuff that would be included in repairs, but I always defer back to the realtor because I'm not necessarily privy to how they wrote the contract.
Well, Gus Czaplak, we appreciate you being our guest in the first half of the show on buying and selling a home. Great information. And one more time, if someone's interested in getting a home inspection from TLC Home Inspection, what number should they call?
Should call 352-435-5190.
And we'd like you to stay tuned because our next guest, Jimmy Bohanon from Bohanon Associates Surveying, is going to discuss the importance of having an accurate survey. Once again, thank you for listening to Around the House, and Gus, have a great day. Welcome back to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber. I'm your host, Don Magruder, and we're having a great conversation talking about what you need to do if you're going to buy and sell a home. Now, I've got somebody on my program I've never had before, never had anybody in his scope of work, and I'm thrilled to have him because we're going to talk about a subject I don't know a lot about, and that's surveying. Jimmy Bohanon is the owner of Bohanon Associates Land Surveying, and you're out of Ocala, but he does surveying throughout Central Florida, and he's considered an expert in the world of surveying. And I've got a bunch of questions, and I'm sure there's folks listening and watching today who have questions. So with that, Jimmy Bohanon, how are you doing today?
Don, I'm doing great this morning.
Uh, Before we get started, once again, I think there's going to be people with a lot. We're going to talk about some things, and they're going to have questions, and they're going to want to know how to contact you. If someone wanted to reach out and contact Jimmy Bohanon, how can they reach you and get a hold of you and find out more about your company?
Well, there's a couple of ways. The easiest way is the telephone number, which is 352-236-2212. And then you can also visit our website, which is www.bohanon, BOHANONALS.com. You can get a quote, you get our contact information, and get a little background on our business and how long we've been in business.
Now, Jimmy, you've been doing this a while. Talk a minute about your history, how long you've been doing land surveying, and your experience levels.
I started land surveying in 1986 in South Florida. During the course of my career, I've spent about 5 years in South Florida surveying. I did a couple of years in Disney World, actually surveying for Disney World. And then I came to Marion County in the mid-90s and worked for the county of Marion County, surveying for them, and then started my own business, which is, my first one was Absolute Land Surveying, which I started in 2001, and then Bohanon Associates in 2010.
How does someone become a surveyor, and what are the license requirements, Jimmy?
To be a surveyor, it's not, you can't just start out saying, well, you know, I've worked on a survey crew, I want to be licensed. It requirements now requires 4 years of college with a basis on surveying. You have to have 8 years of experience. You have to be recommended by 3 other licensed land surveyors in order to even sit for your test. And then the exam is a 3-day, 8-hour a day test that is as difficult and compared to as the bar exam just to be a surveyor because of the amount of information you have to know.
Well, I've looked at surveys and they're very complicated. And with the new laws and regulations, we're going to talk about flood insurance and FEMA maps and all the even eminent domain issues. Surveying is a big deal, and realistically, Jimmy, error in the survey can cost a property owner a lot of money, can it?
Absolutely. And most of the errors that usually comes because of the way the property is described. When you have a family member or you have somebody that just divides up property on their own and they don't use the benefit of a surveyor, it makes a difference.
Okay.
And that's where your errors usually come from.
And there are surveyors, and I know, but I've heard there's surveyors who don't do as good a job as others, and of course would never say anything about another surveyor. However, it is very important that you hire a licensed, qualified surveyor with references, isn't it? Because too much is at stake, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the biggest things that you look for when you're hiring a surveyor is, are they insured? And are they properly insured? Are they paying their people the way they're supposed to? That falls into workman's comp. What most people don't understand with insurance and why it's important, if somebody comes onto your property and they get hurt, if that surveyor is not liable, the homeowner can be.
Absolutely. It's just like a contractor. If someone steps on your property to do work, you assume the risk of that person being on your property. And with many of the construction fields, it's a huge liability.
Absolutely.
Here's my question of the day. And I'm going to call it my Darlene Magruder question of the day because my wife would ask this, and it's a great question. Someone buys a piece of property, and this house has been sold 3 times in the last 20 years, and every time a survey's been done, in fact, maybe the old sticks are out there. Why do I have to get a new survey every time I buy or sell a piece of property?
Typically, and that's a great question, Don. Typically, the first reason is a lender will only accept a survey that's less than 6 months old.
Okay.
And that's usually your first clue. The other reason is people build things.
Yes.
They'll add sheds, they add fences, and not only the person that is purchasing or selling the home, but their neighbors do. And they may not have the availability of a survey, and they need to have that verified prior to. And that can eliminate some issues with your neighbors.
So I understand. So if a house was surveyed 4 years ago, you may have added a shed, and your neighbor may have built a house next to you, and all of a sudden you have an issue with setbacks and maybe a well issue. So that's how it identifies. Okay, that makes perfect sense. The other question is, these county property appraisers' office has gotten so good with these, I think, GSI maps.
Correct.
That'll show you a picture of your property. With that technology, do they need an old-fashioned survey that do what you guys do?
Absolutely. The reason being is the accuracy of those maps. They give you a general idea. And when you go to those websites, one of the first things they do is you have to click on the fact that it's a disclaimer, that they are not 100% accurate. So they may show, and you look at the picture of your property, and it may look like that there is, this person's property or fence is on my property, and that not really be the case. So without a licensed land surveyor doing the survey on the property, there's no way to know for sure. The GIS at this point is nothing more than a suggestion of where it should be.
And also on the map, you can't see the movements of the land, the ups and downs, whether,
Correct.
And plus a line is a pinpoint line or a 2-foot line.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber. Our special guest is Jimmy Bohanon of Bohanon Associates Land Surveying LLC. They're out of Ocala, but they do land surveying out throughout Central Florida. And Jimmy, once again, if someone would like to talk to you about land surveying, what's that phone number again?
That number would be 352-236-2212.
Now, I don't understand land surveying. I'm not a smart man, as you know. And it just amazes me how you get corner blocks and do this. Can you give me and our audience a land surveying 101? How do you do it?
Well, it all starts with how the property is described.
Okay.
And we research the legal description for the property, and sometimes we have to research the legal descriptions for surrounding properties and come up with a general consensus of exactly how the property is shaped, where those property corners should be, and then we go out into the field and we follow up and follow the legal descriptions in order to determine the boundary lines.
But what I'm really driving at, is there pins or something that's established certain lots and blocks and
Right.
And how is all that done, Jimmy?
Well, there are 3 types of legal descriptions for real property.
Okay.
You have the easiest one, which is a lot and block, which is where the subdivision, most of your subdivisions are lot and blocks. All of the villages is lot and blocks, for an example. And the property has been divided up and then broken into blocks, which and then turned broken into lots. The next form of legal description, which is called a meets and bounds description,
Okay.
which means you come from a known point and you'll go so far this direction, so far that direction until you reach the property, and then you go around the property.
Okay, I'm going to ask on that type of survey, and this is a dumb question, but I'm sure.
Not at all.
All right, you have to go 100 feet, but say you have a 20-foot drop in the elevation.
Right.
You're actually going down 20 foot. The 100-foot stays parallel at the same height and drops down at that point, correct?
Correct.
You
It's all done on horizontal measurements.
The reason why I say that, I'm sure there are a lot of people who says my property line goes out 100 foot. They'll take out a 100-foot tape measure and go through it, and through the undulations of the property, they could lose 3-4 feet or more.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Or gain.
All right, now the third way, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. The third description is what is known as a sectional breakdown. Now, the sectional breakdown, the entire state of Florida and most of the country is broken down into 1 mile squares.
Okay.
Now, in order for us to survey a piece of property, now this property can be 600 acres or it could be a 1/4 acre. We have to run this 4 mile square, it's a mile on each side, locate all the corner monuments and the halfway monuments, and then break that section down from there in order to establish where your property lines actually are. And that is the most difficult survey to retrace.
It is.
Absolutely. And it's to the point now because there is so much opportunity for mistakes in that kind of a description that they're no longer allowed to be used.
Okay. But realistically, because land is an ever-changing thing, for example, I didn't realize this, I owned a piece of property out in the Ocala forest, and the piece of property bordered a dirt road. The road shifts. The road will not stay the same. Those things will move. That's sort of a big deal when it comes to accurate surveys, isn't it?
Absolutely. A lot of your rural areas, the road started as a trail.
Right.
What was the path of least resistance? And then they came back in and they may have slagged it or lime rocked it at one point, and then it eventually became asphalt. Doesn't necessarily mean that it falls exactly in the right of way.
Because amazingly, the corner of my lot wound up in the middle of the road.
Absolutely. That's how that works.
Take me through the process. And once again, our listeners and viewers, when they need a land survey, you know, a lot of, for example, when we were talking to Gus Czaplak earlier about home inspections, there's this vision in mind. It costs thousands of dollars for a home inspection. For $300, you can get a great home inspection. All right, take me through the process of getting a piece of property surveyed. The first thing they're going to do, if they want to have a survey, they could call Bohanon Associates Land Surveying at what number, Jimmy?
352-236-2212.
All right, now what's going to happen when they call you? They're going to say, Jimmy, I got a piece of property that I need you to survey. From there, what's going to happen?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is ask them for the address or the parcel number if they happen to have that information handy. And then I'm going to look up the property, find out exactly how it's described, and then I'm going to ask the customer, what are you using the survey for? Because there are different types of surveys for different types of needs. And I want to make sure that they're getting exactly what they need, not more, not less. And that's what they count on me when they call. Now, after I've looked at the property, I've explained to them what we're going to have to do in order to do the survey for their needs. Then I let them know the price, we agree, we set a time that we go out and do the survey. And typically it takes us, depending on the size property, 2 to 4 days to do the survey from start to finish.
So if someone called you today, maybe in 4 days, you got to have it surveyed.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, you've done the survey. What type of report are you going to share with them, Jimmy?
They're going to get 5 signed and sealed documents that have a graphic description of the property. They're going to have the legal description that's on there. It's going to have a flood statement, which means we're going to identify what zones that FEMA says that the property is in. And then it'll have the certifications they're going to need on the survey for their lender, title company, and so forth.
Now, on the property, will you provide stakes to show exactly where their property lies?
Absolutely. Depending on the use of the survey, if they're putting up a fence, we'll leave the corners exposed so they can actually see them. There'll be wood stakes by each one of the corners. If it's for a mortgage purpose or a new buyer that is just looking to purchase the property and they don't want to leave them exposed, we have pin flags that we use at each corner that identify where the corner is. Most of the property corners, 90% of them, are subsurface, typically right below the sod line.
Okay. I know you can't get too detailed on pricing because you're a professional service, but for a general quarter-acre lot in a subdivision, what's a typical survey run, Jimmy?
Quarter-acre lot in a recorded subdivision, depending on the area, can run you between $250 to $295.
Okay. So once again, it's not a big deal. It's not a great deal.
Absolutely not.
So for example, if someone's listening today and say they're in a dispute with their neighbor about whatever, and we're going to talk about fencing a little later, they could call and have a survey done for a few $100, and that would completely settle the dispute out correctly?
Absolutely. It definitely gives them more leverage, and whatever the case may be, if they decide that that's not going to be enough to settle the suit and they decide that they're going to go to an attorney or they're going to seek legal action, they're going to have a survey right off the bat anyway.
Yep.
So it's best to, if you have this issue, give us your surveyor a call, have us come out and let you know exactly what you're working with.
Okay, so if someone called you today, when would they have that report in hand, you think?
They would have it within 4 business days.
Wow, so not only would you get the survey done, you'd give them the report within 4 days.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty quick turnaround.
Well, that's one of the things we pride ourselves on, is being able to service our clients in a timely manner. A lot of times you have such a limited window when you're purchasing property that you have to be able to get it out there and get it done in order for the documents to go to the mortgage company, go to the title company, for them to be reviewed, and for the client to have a timely closing.
I knew a property owner one time who had a survey done, and he told me the smart things when the survey sticks are out there, go ahead and try to put something for yourself more permanent, like a little 4x4 post or something. Do you recommend that? Or I know in many cases it's hard to do, especially in a neighborhood, but if you're in a situation you could put something a little more permanent, do you recommend that or discourage that?
I recommend it under the premise of you cannot disturb the corner. So if you're going to set a corner marker or something to identify where that's at, make sure you give yourself at least 6 inches away from where the corner is, and that way you do not disturb the actual corner, because it is a crime to disturb property corners.
Oh, it is?
Absolutely.
And what's defined as a property corner, Jimmy?
It is.
Is that the underneath pin?
Correct.
Okay.
Not the wood stake that sticks up or the pin flag, but the actual monument that would be either a piece of rebar, a piece of pipe, or a concrete 4x4 monument.
So underneath in the corner, you're going to see, once again, won't you tell that to our listeners and audience?
You will find either an iron pipe, a piece of steel, rebar, number 5 rebar, or you will find a 4-inch by 4-inch concrete monument.
And you have to keep that, dude.
That needs to be there. Now, a surveyor can come and update the corner. Say you had just a piece of pipe and you wanted a concrete monument, your surveyor can come in and replace that monument for you, but he will have to do the survey for the property.
Okay. You mentioned to it earlier about doing a flood map things. Let's talk a little bit about FEMA flood maps, because they've recently been updated, and there's some real problems with the FEMA flood maps. They've been updated that people who were not in flood zones are now in flood zones, or people who were looking at property thought they were high and dry are now subject to flood insurance. Talk a minute about some of the services you can offer people and the type of surveys you do for flood zone and flood zone areas.
Well, the biggest one that we do for that is an elevation certificate, which is where you have to, we come out, we run an elevation to the property, we take pictures of the property, we shoot the finished floor, we shoot the garage, we take a measurement on the AC pad and the surrounding ground. And then we bring that information back to the office, and I fill out a form from FEMA where it has a place for all this information, what the base flood zone is for the property, and it gives you a information on whether or not your property is actually in a flood zone. Now, just because FEMA says that your house is in a flood zone doesn't mean that your house is necessarily in the flood zone.
Okay, and I understand that there's a lot of confusion, a lot of mistakes, and a lot of errors in these things. And also, if a house is built up a certain way, if you've added dirt to the area, so these topographies are big deals, aren't they?
Absolutely.
How long does it take to get these type of topography surveys done?
Now, for us to do an elevation certificate, you're still looking at 4 to 5 business days from start to finish.
And you have the experience to help someone through this process?
Absolutely. We work with an engineering firm here in Tavares that between our elevation certificate and their engineering of the area, they can actually, if the numbers work right, they can have your home and possibly property taken out of a flood zone if it happens to fall in there.
I have been told, and you tell me if it's wrong, now I take it during your topography examinations, you guys will look at drainage areas. Do you do any type of perk test, or is that something separate?
That's something separate. That doesn't fall within our licensing.
That would go to the engineer probably, wouldn't it?
There are a type of engineer that does that.
Okay. Do you know if these drainage areas, though, can mitigate some of the flood issues or not?
It can, and that's where the engineer ties in. We supply the information, the raw data that they'll need in order to determine exactly what the retention ponds can hold, what they were designed for, and is there really going to be an issue.
You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber. We're having a great discussion with Jimmy Bohanon. He's the owner of Bohanon Associates Land Surveying out of Ocala. And I've learned a lot about surveying. I hope our audience has learned a lot, because it's been great information. And once again, Jimmy, if someone wants to talk to you because they had a question about land surveying, what number can they reach you at?
They can reach me at 352-236-2212.
Now, I've got my question of the day for you. Wonder how many fences have been put up and down, taken up and taken down here in Lake and Sumter County and Marion County because they put the fence on the wrong side of the line. First off, you tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm going to install a fence, you should have a land survey done automatically.
Absolutely. That should be the first step.
Because even taking a string from point A to point B, a lot of times doesn't work, does it?
No, it doesn't. And if somebody has messed with one of the corners, have moved one of the corners, and you put the fence up, it's still your liability for where you put the fence.
Okay, so someone's wanting to build a fence, they could call you and say, hey, Jimmy, I need to put up a fence around my house. Can you come out and survey? How are you going to mark that, knowing that this is a fence area?
Typically, we'll put some stakes along the property line. That way they have no misconceptions about exactly where their property line is. And then we always recommend that you give at least 4 inches inside your property for your fence, just to be protected.
So you say the fence should go 4 inches to the inside, never right on it.
Correct.
Okay. The other thing, and I hate bringing this up, but there's a belief that every other surveyor makes an accurate, they do well, they don't make mistakes. And especially if the government's involved. Now, most of us are a little jaded these days, and we realize and see the mistakes our government makes all the time. But there's an assumption by property owners that the government put the road in the right place, that the developer put the fence in the right place, that all the sewer lines are put in the right place. And that's really far from the truth. There are probably thousands of mistakes of infrastructure put in the wrong area, and it could seriously impact your property, can it?
Absolutely. And that falls underneath the same premise that even though they're the government, they're still human beings. And human beings are prone to make mistakes. And to have somebody that can back you up with, that's their job, their specialty, is what is happening in the boundaries of your property, absolutely, I recommend that that's where you go with that.
And the thing about it, if you're assuming these infrastructure items, you could have a fence, maybe a developer fence on your property, or you could have a road. I remember there's a development here in Leesburg in which a property line was actually in the center of the road.
Absolutely, and that happens quite often. Not so much anymore, but that breaks back to the older descriptions in where the right-of-ways were easements versus actually being right-of-ways.
Jimmy, we had earlier in the year a leading attorney for eminent domain talk about eminent domain projects and their impact. And there's 2 elements that he kept referring to, surveys and topos, because of drainage issues off new roads and turnpikes and bridges, and surveys on encroachment on properties. Talk a minute about how you can help someone in an eminent domain case.
Well, I look at eminent domain cases as you want to have a surveyor, if this is going to happen to your property, you want to have a surveyor that can come up and basically give you a second opinion. The government is going to have the surveyors on their side. Now, in a perfect world, they should all be autonomous in how it functions, but it doesn't. And so a mistake can be made, it can impact your property, and to have a second opinion, a surveyor of your own hiring come out and survey your property, you'll know exactly where you stand, and if there is a mistake, you're protected.
You know, Jimmy, we talked about that surveyors make mistakes, and I've heard you speak at a public forum one time about how much you try to avoid mistakes and that your licenses are on the line. But you know, in this days and times, there's a lot of people don't have your same care as others. Why talk about why it's important that your surveyor is properly insured and he's signing off, because that's something that you've got to have that surveyor stand behind what he's saying, don't you?
Absolutely. And most people don't realize, unlike a lot of professions, the surveying profession, the licensed land surveyor that signs the survey is liable for what the correctness of his survey till the end of his life or the end of his license. And at some point that there's an issue, then he can still liable or lose his license.
Isn't some of the problem, though, you'll have surveying companies get so big that they'll just hire apprentices and helpers, and they'll do the survey, and the person who's actually the license holder, the experienced one, a lot of times will never check those issues.
Absolutely.
Isn't that the problem with getting with too big a survey company?
Well, I won't say it's a problem with being too big. I'll say it's a problem with lack of management.
Okay.
It's definitely something that needs to be addressed. Being a big surveying firm doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, but it needs to be structured properly so that you have the opportunity to prevent there from being needless mistakes.
And Jimmy, what's just real quick, what's the biggest error most people make when hiring a surveyor?
They don't check and see if they're insured, and they leave themselves open to the liability.
Well, we want to thank you, Jimmy Bohanon, the owner of Bohanon Associates Land Surveying, for being our guest today. Man, you've given us a lot of great information, and I'm sure there's people out there who's listening and seeing this program saying, I've got some questions. One more time, if they'd like to talk to you about anything with land surveying, what number can they call you at?
They can reach us at 352-236-2212.
And we want to thank you for listening and watching Around the House. And be sure to catch the Around the House column each week in the Daily Commercial and the South Lake Press. Until next week, we'll see you around the house.